And so the church really looks a lot like the rest of the world when it comes to um, elevating people, because and it's exponential. Your church grows to 5,000. Well, you must have something to say.
You must be doing something right.
Yeah. So therefore, it's probably going to grow to 10,000.
Yeah.
Therefore, you're probably going to get a bigger, an exponentially larger audience, which really doesn't have. It has more to do with your persona than it does with what you're teaching. Welcome back.
Yeah. What day is it?
I
think it's funny because we're like totally stoic, and then it's almost like, wait, we're actually recording this.
Oh yes, let's record. We should smile.
We're smiling, and then it's like, oh no, we're fake smiling. No, that's not it.
I'm laughing.
It's good to be
you.
back. We've had a little break from Rough Cut for a while.
What, a month or so?
Yeah, we took off. Yeah, we popped off toward right before Christmas, and we said we were going to take a couple weeks and think through, this next. This next season of recordings and shows, and so
we did the break part.
We did the break,
really
and we had a brief conversation about it. But it's been a good one. So hopefully everybody's holiday season, Christmas break, all that stuff has been enjoyable for them, and they're ready to start digging back into some interesting topics. That's for sure.
I hope so. I'm really looking forward to so you guys know who are viewing or listening. Today's not really going to be part of a new series, but we are starting we're going to start a series called That's Not in the Bible. That working title. I don't know if that's what we'll call it. But what we've noticed is there seems to be some cultural cliches or idioms.
Or even just
like ideas and concepts that people attach to the Bible, attach to Christianity or Scripture, and then just kind of move along as if that is there. And what we started thinking about was how often that gets pushed into churches, and whole kind of worldviews come out of these things that are not even scriptural, but we kind of attach them to some sort of biblical principle and say they are.
It's amazing what you can actually make a biblical principle if you pull stuff out of context.
It seems like people make a lot more money doing that than what we do.
It's true. That's true.
So that's what's coming. That's what we're going to try to do several weeks of that.
I would even say in some ways today is loosely connected to that concept. So one of the things that kind of triggered the topic for today was a couple weeks ago there was some some movement in and around online, in and around a biblical scholar named Wes Huff, Wesley Huff, that ended up he kind of had a conversation with someone else that has some different ideas, and then ended up on Rogan's podcast. And so
if you're not familiar with that, that's Joe Rogan is the most popular podcast in the world. So not everybody knows who that is, but he has millions and millions of listeners every week.
But what this Billy guy did was he's a biblical scholar of the ancient languages, and he's a believer and Wes, sorry.
Wes debated Billy.
Well, did I say Wes or Wesley, or did I say Billy?
You just said Billy now.
Well, Billy was on first. And
Billy was on first.
And then, but anyway, so Wes was on. And so he just walked through a lot of the evidence of, like, how do you understand if the Bible's trustworthy, and interacted with some of the different ideas and concepts. And I actually checked out that conversation, and I was really encouraged. But there was this thing inside of me that was incredibly hesitant to see a believer in such a public forum engaging in a way that I was like, ooh, that's so cool.
Oh, yeah.
I really appreciate it. And it brought up this whole idea of, because you don't have to live with your head inside of a hole to realize that over the last, 5-10 years, even longer, there has been a massive, you hear more about people in pastors or ministry leaders of, ministry organizations that fail and like burn,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
gloriously walk away from the truths of who Jesus is and what he's done,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
use it as a way to abuse others.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this hesitation that I felt in seeing somebody say things better than I could say
Mm-hmm.
them, and with more, evidentiary, like a knowledge of all the things, like in the minutia of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and going like, oh, I'm so excited about this, but I'm also really hesitant to
Yeah.
go, oh no, when's the other shoe going to drop and we're going to find out that this guy's not actually a good guy. And
Yeah.
and I was really convicted about that
Mm-hmm.
because there's a reason you flinch
Yeah.
when you see, you know, somebody explode and Christians starting to elevate someone's
Yeah.
status
Yeah.
within the community, but also like it's cool, but it's also like, oh no,
Mm-hmm.
there's some hesitancy there. And so it raised the conversation of um, w- the concept of celebrity culture within the
Mm-hmm.
church,
Mm-hmm.
and how is it that we should look at and respond to those things?
Yeah.
Because if it didn't seem like Wes was trying to um,
To be that.
yeah, he wasn't
Yeah.
trying to become like this. Oh, look,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
here. Um, but people often tend to see somebody with some charisma and some
Mm-hmm.
knowledge and understanding and elevate that.
Yeah.
And it happens in small churches. It happens,
Mm-hmm.
like where like there's a lot of things that are going on. And so today we wanted just to talk a little bit about how do we respond to celebrity
Mm-hmm.
culture,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a horrible way, I think, to do it, because if you look at Jesus's, even his teaching to the disciples in Matthew and in Luke, he's like, hey, these guys were jockeying to be in first place and to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
places of prominence.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, that's not the way it should be with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
the one that wants to be great should become the servant.
Yeah.
And so what's the mindset that is helpful for us to um, be wise when we see someone's status within the Christian community elevated,
Yeah.
but also like let's have that
So
let's think out loud about this.
I think that let's start with a broader
Sure.
overview of what is celebrity culture
Mm.
in general and why is it so damaging and
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah.
I think that we'll get to the subcontext or the subtext of the
Sure.
church, but overall, it does seem like people in general
Mm-hmm.
are drawn to celebrity,
Mm-hmm.
and whether that is American culture, Canadian culture, Indian culture,
Mm-hmm.
Chinese culture,
Yeah.
Korea has. I'm more familiar with South
Yeah.
Korea because my wife is
Yeah.
part Korean, so we have this kind of connection to Korean culture. We watch a lot of Korean shows
Yeah.
and are familiar with K-pop and
Yeah.
like the celebrity culture in Korea is unbelievable, but
Yeah.
it kind of crosses all all of Asia.
Yeah.
When you watch. A good example is a YouTube video of a popular American singer might
Yeah.
have like 10 million views or something
Yeah.
like that. And you look at that and go, oh my goodness, 10 million people have seen this Taylor Swift song or
Yeah.
have seen this Justin Timberlake song or
Yeah.
something like that. But you watch a K-pop and it's like 257 million views.
Yeah.
And it's like mind-boggling. Like entire countries are watching this.
Yeah.
There are more people. There are fewer people in Korea that have
Yeah.
seen this K-pop video. That like it's mind-boggling, the numbers.
Yeah.
So I think, and then what comes out of that is an obsession with that person or that
Sure.
persona.
Yeah.
So people watch a celebrity and then they follow their lives.
Yeah.
It's not just what they produce as an
Sure.
actor or a musician.
Sure.
Now they're like, what are they wearing?
Yeah.
Oh,
Where are
okay,
they at?
yeah.
Where do they eat?
Yeah,
What
where
do they do?
eat? What cars are they
What
driving?
clothes are they wearing?
Yep.
Who are they with?
Yeah.
I saw that. This is a little bit of a weird story, but we were walking in New York City years ago, and it was probably it was during that whole season of like the Lord of the Rings being
Yeah,
out,
yep.
and we were going to go down and see a show, and so we were walking through this one neighborhood, and we looked over, and Elijah Wood was sitting at one of the outdoor cafes who played Frodo in those movies, and he was sitting there like on a date with somebody, and one of the guys that I was with was like a huge like film fanatic, and he was like, I'm gonna get my picture with him. I gotta do this, and I was just like, no. Like like it's really cool that you saw him. Like let it. He's on a date. Like he's like he's with a friend. Life. It's a like let him do that.
Yeah.
And I actually talked my friend down until someone else saw him and was like, Frodo! And then my buddy's like, dude, I'm getting my picture now. And he was gracious. He engaged with everybody that was there. But there was an element of, I felt bad for him in that sense.
Yep.
But you see that in all the pictures of people like getting out of a car and trying to go into a building with all the paparazzi, and everybody's like we want to know like what's going on in their lives.
Well, there's whole publishing industries based on that.
Yeah.
Like Us Weekly, People Magazine, TMZ.
Yeah.
All of those are like, that's all they do is celebrity culture.
Sure.
And I think that one of the reasons it bothers me so much, and like you said, it's damaging. It must be awful for the person, for the celebrity, because it's so dehumanizing. That's the first issue to me, really, is it dehumanizes the individual and places their persona above everything else.
Yeah.
And it says that these people are public access now.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter where they are.
Yeah.
And you hear
you
about...
have exchanged your privacy for for becoming an entertainer, not just in film, but with your life.
Yeah. So exactly. So your whole life becomes this thing that people watch. It's very Truman Show-esque, where
it's true.
Where everybody's just like, "Ooh, what are they doing? What are they doing?" So it dehumanizes the celebrity, the individual.
Sure.
It also elevates their opinion. It elevates them to a point of almost worship, so that the people viewing are reading about them. They want to know
what are their thoughts,
what they're doing. Oh, they had thoughts on climate change. Then what? Well, they may not have any idea about. They have no idea what they're talking about, and that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah,
we shouldn't expect just because somebody is elevated to have good ideas about everything.
Yeah. Well, we want people to be concerned about things that matter. And so,
that's just an example of
so you've seen like, I think of like, that was one I remember hearing people rail for or against, that even in a political cycle, but growing up, I remember several celebrities in like very focused on Darfur. And the genocide and the things they're trying to use their status to draw attention to things that like were going underneath the radar for so many people. And so it's like there's elements where some people try to use that for like a positive thing. And I think everybody probably in some way is trying to say, well, this matters to me.
Right. I have a platform.
I have a platform, so I'm going to use it. And that's fine. But the dynamic of we have to recognize that just because someone is elevated to a public platform doesn't necessarily mean that they are there for us to consume.
Yeah, and I think that's it doesn't bother me that they have a platform or that they use it. It bothers me that millions of people will hang on their words. And I mean, if you have a climate scientist come on and say, I've studied this for 35 years, here's what's going on. People were like, I don't care. What does Leo DiCaprio say about it? So that's it's this elevation, but it gets me because we are the ones that elevate them. Now, certainly there are publicists and there are managers and they're using a system, but they're using a system that exists. It's not like they're creating the system to elevate stars and celebrity. They're saying, here's how it works. If we do this, 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 and this, you'll get 5 million followers on Instagram. And that's what happens.
And that happens like, and I don't know if you want to transition yet, but that happened, like the systems and the structures that are in place, like I think we have to recognize that we have either enabled or created those. As a society.
Right.
And I think that is, in many ways, that spills over into faith communities.
Well, before we get to the faith community, I want to ask the question, why?
Yeah.
Why do we need this? Why do we do it? Why does the system exist?
Why does the system, or why does the desire exist?
Well, I guess they feed each other.
Yeah.
So the desire exists, therefore there's a system for it, or
Yeah.
the system exists, therefore we
I
create desire. I don't know which comes first.
Sure. Yeah. Probably the chicken.
Mm.
I think like, if I'm going to look at it from a theological framework, at least in a concept, like we were made to have wonder and awe and to worship. We were made to give
worship, yeah.
We were made to give worth to things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's an innate desire that we have. But I also think some of the structures of society have created different classes. And so a lot of us go, well, I'll never get that. So I want to look.
It's a kind of vicarious living.
Yeah. You know, we're living through somebody else's life. Like, I mean, that's why, like, you know, Cribs existed. What? Why? Who really cares? Like, Lifestyle, Robin Leach with Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we're gonna go and like there is this whole thing of like, well, let me show you what the other side lives like.
Yeah.
You know, let me show you what it's like to have, you know, 10 bathrooms in your home and, you know, and a serving staff and pools and hot tubs and saunas and a fleet of vehicles. And like, there is this thing that's like, ooh, that's what the good life looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think there's a curiosity, there's a desire to look into it and to go like, oh, that looks better than what my experience is.
Right.
And so then automatically, if they've somehow achieved that, then there should be something about them that is worthy of that.
So the accomplishment creates the value.
I think there's an element of that.
Yeah.
At least that would be my initial thought.
Yeah.
And if you go, hey, inside of us, there is a desire to give worth to something, and if it's not going to be us, it's going to be somebody that we think like they either have beauty or they have, you know, they have like the skill set or the knowledge or the intellect or the business acumen. They've got the thing that I want, right?
Yeah, and that's what's I get confused.
Sure.
By this.
I do that to a lot of people.
No, not by what you're saying. I get confused because I don't know what we're elevating people to. You know, so I have musicians that I really like.
Yeah.
I've followed them for years. I buy their music. I listen to them regularly.
Yeah.
And I'm Facebook friends with most of them.
Yeah.
You know, we chat once in a while.
Every now and then.
Every now and then.
Yeah. I know what that's like.
Yeah. but like I don't know what a person who reads People magazine is elevating those people to. Like, you are famous because you did this famous because everybody knows who you are. So it's almost like it's like the Kardashians, you know, famous for being famous has become kind of a cliche, but what did you do to become famous? Well, I was very wealthy.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah.
That doesn't take anything more. So being successful is enough to then elevate you and it just seems like the more people who know who you are,
like nepotism.
Yeah, it just
all of a sudden
the more people who know who you are just means that you're famous and you're a celebrity now.
Sure.
So it's just so vacuous. I guess that's what confuses me. There's nothing there.
I think we've got to also consider that sense of everybody has coping mechanisms to help them deal with like the disappointments of life.
Oh yes,
or the uncomfortable moments of life.
So if I can watch somebody else,
be successful, I don't have to think about how much my life stinks.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to think about like how much it's hard to get groceries. You know, or you know whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so I can just like and I say that just because I've known enough people that would say things like, well, if I could, look at that. If I could just have that, then I'd be happy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, maybe not,
You know how many people got so sad when Brad and Angelina broke up?
I don't remember that, Mike. To be honest, I was more mature. No. Yeah.
It's like I think there's also a desire for connection.
Sure.
And so
we're connected to people of influence.
Yeah, well, we're connected to people of influence and power, but we're connected just because we know about them.
Yeah.
It's not
we don't know them.
We don't know them as a person. We know their persona.
Yeah.
And we know the more intimate details we can know about their life, then the more connected we kind of feel to them.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Yeah. And then if you take into consideration, they probably have publicity firms and organizations, what they've curated for you.
Right.
Yeah.
You
know what they want you to know.
It's a well thought out process.
Until scandals break and, pictures and stories come out and, like the nice facade comes crumbling down. And we've seen that in celebrity culture, all across the board. It's, you think of all the curiosity in and around Epstein and, and the Diddy files and all that, it's like, wait, well, who's all going to be in there? And, so it's like, everybody's looking because it's like, well,
which celebrity
now
was that?
It's almost like at that point, it's almost like there's an impending car accident that's going to happen. And
we're
people
all waiting
are just waiting
for
to
it.
see who's going to get got,
Yep.
And so then there's the conspiracy theory, and then there's this, and then there's that, and it's like the old school circus and the sideshows. Somebody that's screaming for attention.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So does it, in some ways, to kind of summarize where we're at with celebrity culture in general, some of it goes back to good old fashioned entertainment.
Yeah.
So you're an actor, great.
Yep.
I get to watch the rest of your life. I also get to watch your relationships fall apart. I get to talk about how much, what scandal has erupted around you. I get to find out who your brother was that wanted to stay, in the shadows, and all of a sudden everybody knows who they are. And, so part of it is just this sick entertainment kind of thing where I'm entertained by other people's lives, not just what they do produce on screen or
reality shows.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate reality show.
Reality TV stars.
Yeah.
What is that? Anyway, that's a whole different thing. So there's that. Then there's the vicarious living, which is a little bit more beyond entertainment. It's more like I want what they have.
Yeah.
I desire to be, or at least to feel this connection to power.
Sure.
And then there's the beyond that is kind of like worship of the celebrity. We wouldn't necessarily call it worship, but I think it is. It does get to that point of elevating someone above us, above you, and like, I want to know everything about them.
And for the most part, our conversation is entered around like celebrity, like entertainers.
Yeah.
But you see that with politicians.
Yep.
You see it with businessmen.
Yeah.
You see it like for the different niches that people are fascinated by.
It's all the same. Yeah, it becomes celebrity.
Yeah. And I think that happens in the church world as well.
Yeah, and that's I think that's where the damage that's caused by celebrity is that alienation and dehumanization of the person. And it's also the vacuous nature of the ones worshiping something that doesn't actually exist, that's not actually real.
Yeah.
And then that elevation of the person inevitably means that people are putting their trust in that person. They're putting their hope in that person. They're somehow emotionally connected with that person. And then so it comes into the church.
Their faith, their teaching, their whatever, their charisma becomes like, oh, I like that. I want that. Right. Yeah.
So what does celebrity culture in the church look different than outside of the church?
I don't think it does. Personally, I don't. It's just the thing that is fascinating. Like, oh, they're close to God. Like they're close to the one I want to be close to. Their life seems like they have it together. And even in the sense of, as you see, and we try to be semi, transparent, even in our teaching and stuff, or with the people we engage with. You still don't talk about everything. And so then you've got people that are like, oh, he's like me, he's accessible, he's got real problems, she's got real problems. I just respect the way that their family is. It's like we look at the things that maybe we want to experience or that we value, and so you end up with ministry leaders, becoming elevated.
I think one of the things that makes the Christian celebrity culture a little bit different.
Mm.
It's just a different spin. Is that um, we get excited, Christians get excited when somebody does well.
Yeah.
In the general culture.
Yeah.
So, like you were saying with Wes on Rogan's show,
Yeah.
Wes Huff gets on, like, this little known biblical textual scholar,
Yeah.
gets on the biggest podcast in the world,
Yeah.
and has millions of people watching this interview for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's
a platform we
that's
don't
a
normally
platform
have.
that most people don't have. What's going to happen? And I think that's what in general, we just get really excited about somebody standing up and saying, I'm a Christian in the general culture.
Yeah.
And that immediately elevates them.
Yeah. And I would say for some of us, it's seeing somebody stand up and go, I'm a Christian, and it's not in a cringy way.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You know, it's like, that's like, that person's actually like, I respect that.
Yeah.
Like I have a lot of those opinions, and that's great. You know,
and they're getting a platform. They're getting their their view out there, and they're doing a good job presenting well.
Yeah, they're thoughtful. They're this. They're that. Right. I think the thing that breaks my heart in looking at that is, it turns into very much a hero worship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think of people that I've either followed over the years or that in church planting you look at and you go, oh, that person, right, is somebody worth emulating, or their strategies are worth trying to repeat, or, you know, and you look at those types of things and you go, I can think of multiple people of multiple generations in different church contexts that were the it person.
Yeah.
Whether it was in the apologetic world or in the church world or in the faith leader world. And it's like, and their status just went shoom, and it exploded. And I'm reminded of like David in the Old Testament, who is listed as saying he's a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
And when he became king, the isolation, and the shattering of like he wasn't able to handle it.
Yeah.
So if a guy is the only person in Scripture that's called like the man after God's own heart, is a guy that
fell,
that totally falls. Like why do we do that?
Yeah.
And elevate people to a point where they become isolated or other than.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it comes back to, the structure. It comes back to the systems that are in place within the church world and within the broader culture that says we will elevate those we want to emulate or value or ascribe worth to them. We'll make them other than.
And I think I think it's all of those things. I think also in addition to that, we want somebody to speak for us. So they carry far more than they should.
Yeah.
But they carry the weight of the church. They carry the weight of Christians across the country.
Sure.
So when you have a celebrity pastor or a celebrity ministry leader who stands up in front of millions of people and says, this, like, here, I'm going to speak to you. And maybe they're saying good things, but they're saying, but the way Christians elevate them is to say, look at him.
Yeah.
I'm not as culpable now.
Yeah.
I just live my little life here.
Yeah.
That guy is doing it the way it should be done, or that guy carries the weight of what Christianity should look like. And so when there's an inevitable real human event in their lives where there's failure or there's scandal or there's frustration or discouragement or whatever it is, then the crash is not on the secular celebrity side. The crash is not just more entertainment. It's more scandal. It's like, they'll come back eventually, but for the next 5 years, we're all going to be mad at them. What happens in the Christian world is when they fall, they take Christianity with them. the representation of the church, the representation of God, of who Christ is, everything
gets pulled
into that.
Yeah, that was so when I knew we were going to have this conversation yesterday, I was like, oh, okay, like what I started looking about celebrity culture and was reading an article and listening to somebody that was talking about pastoral philosophy, and they made a mention of the people that have fallen in ministry, and he started going through a couple names, and he mentioned somebody that I didn't know about.
Oh.
And I'm like, wait, what? And
what
was not what I was expecting, because I had an acquaintance that was on staff at that church.
Oh, okay.
And he is, and he was like, oh, and this guy, and he said, and that really just shocked me. And I was like, wait, what? And so then I hopped on, and I went down the rabbit hole. Of, oh my goodness, what happened? Because like I've really appreciated some of the little bit of interaction I'd had with that pastor. I was like, oh, like I like the way that he's engaging from a platform in answering questions and engaging with the people that were there. And I was just caught off guard a little bit. And then you look at it and it goes like, there were massive systems of abuse, of power, and things that were enabled where there was no accountability and isolation, which is what you were getting at. And so then somebody made mention of another book that I actually want to read. I think it's called The Atlas Factor. But the premise of the book is like, we have created a culture where in the Greek mythology, Atlas was given a punishment of having to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. And so the author's premise of this book is that we, as Christians, we have created a culture where we elevate our celebrities so that they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And we were never intended to do that. And Jesus, even Jesus is like, he flips that upside down. And it's not, he's the one that's carrying it. And the work of ministry isn't for the experts that are carrying the weight of it all, but it should be dispersed through the whole church, which eliminates the isolation. Like it's follow me. It's not my teachings or like it, you know what I mean? It's not, it's like, it's, and so started thinking about that. In some ways I hadn't thought about it that specifically. And we've gone through a thing here at the church looking at how do we even structure our leadership after, you know, like diversify that away from just the pastors to have people in the church that are coming alongside that bring some diversity to an awareness of what's going on and going like, okay, all right, we're making good steps in a direction to try and prevent some of that like top-down isolation. We can make decisions completely separate. But it really, I think the thing that I felt in walking out of the office yesterday was the reminder that the problems are problems that we have built those beds. And like we've kind of in some ways stepped away from the teachings of Jesus and created a culture within Christianity that mirrors society more so than what Christ has called us to.
That was the question as you were talking. That was the question that came to mind. Did we, as the church, create the culture, or did we just not care that the rest of American culture infiltrated the church? Like we've adopted that way of thinking about Christian leadership. We've taken people who may have an influence and elevated them and said, oh, good, there's somebody here who has an influence that I can now follow, that I can look up to, that can carry this weight for us. I think about the publishing industry and what a huge mess that is. But Christian publishing is very much based on how much of an audience do you already have. And so
is there a base of people that the publisher can market to if they publish your book?
And to even think about how many times a book is written by two different people and the biggest name is the one you recognize with the guy who actually knows what he's talking about. You know, it's like these are so and I listened to Sky Jatani, who's a published author, was an editor with Christianity Today, has been in that world for a long time, and he rails against it so often, where he says that there's like publishers will look at how many Instagram followers do you have, how big is your church, how far is your reach. Now we will give you a book deal because your reach is this far, because we don't have to do as much to market. So the return on investment is way better than, someone who may be a pastor of 50 people and has really solid theology and a really phenomenal way of presenting that theology. But he doesn't have a following. He doesn't have a national audience. So somebody like that isn't going to get elevated, isn't going to get a platform. And so the church really looks a lot like the rest of the world when it comes to elevating people, because and it's expensive. Your church grows to 5,000. Well, you must have something to say.
You must be doing something right.
So therefore, it's probably going to grow to 10,000. Therefore, you're probably going to get a bigger, an exponentially larger audience. Which really doesn't have. It has more to do with your persona than it does with what you're teaching and how truthful it is and how much you're calling people to live as the church.
It was an interesting thing that I came across in kind of doing a little prep for this, was that the concept of church leadership, or leadership as a whole, leadership is a term which is really like management. Didn't really start until it didn't show up until like the 60s, the 50s. In fact, the word leadership wasn't even in the Webster's dictionary at the turn of the century. It just wasn't.
Well, it was definitely a post-World War II concept that came out, and that's when CEOs all developed this like general mentality. There's a hierarchy.
The guy that ran Bethlehem Steel was the one that developed this concept of where we get our ideas of white collar and blue collar.
Really?
Like if there's not enough, if they're like people are dumb unless they have somebody to follow into battle. And so we got to have this, and so we've got to produce these types of things, these types of leaders that can keep the masses doing what they need to do. And it was like, oh, that's uncomfortable. So the one article mentioned that as far as leadership in the Oxford Dictionary from like 55. The word wasn't anywhere. They found it under the term leader, like at the bottom of like the definitions, and it was like a simple sentence of like the act of being that. But now it's taken. But now it's all over. I mean, I would hate to guess what you could do if you would Google books that say leadership in Amazon and see how many titles there are. So it's like it's like we're fascinated with it, and I think the thing that I alluded to it at the beginning is okay, what did Jesus call his disciples to? And then what did the disciples call other people to? So like Peter talks about following his example. And then some of the accusations against Paul from like the super apostles, the people that were critical of Paul, were kind of like he writes such strong letters. He's so like bold, and then he shows up and he's like this meek and humble guy, and it's like, well, okay, and Paul's like letters so much say like, listen, just live how I'm living. Like it's not the addressing the issues for him. It's like it's not like he's gonna fire off a bunch of things, right. And it's easy. He's got to write a letter, so he's got to kind of get right to the point, And so people are all like, "Oh, he's such a jerk. He's so harsh." And so this, but then he shows up and he's like, and he talks about it. He's like, "Do you remember how we lived among you? We didn't put a burden on you. We loved you. We worked, and then we also like modeled the ways of Jesus to you." And it's like you sit there and you go like, "Oh." And I think that's where we get off when we say the role of leadership in ministries is about the event. And when we look at church and go, the people that we will elevate in ministry leadership, the men and women that are leading the church and speaking from the pulpit, we elevate them because they have a persona and they're good communicators and they're this and they're this. But what you see in the scripture is something very different.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to process that a little bit.
Yeah, it's we I like how you use that event concept, that
Mm-hmm.
because those are the celebrities of our culture, are the
Mm-hmm.
event.
Yeah.
You go to the concert, you
Yeah.
buy their album,
Yeah.
you watch the movie, you
Yep.
watch the TV show, you watch the politician
Mm-hmm.
at their rally, and
Yep. You
like
go to the church service.
yeah, everything is the event. So the church
Yeah.
service becomes another cultural
Yeah.
event. And the people who do that event well
Mm-hmm.
are the ones who will draw the crowd.
Sure.
And the crowd then says, this event is awesome.
Sure.
Um, and so it's gonna keep going.
Yeah.
And so we then elevate the one who does the event well gets more and more
Yeah.
praise.
Yeah.
And but that has nothing to do with living a Christian life.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
event is good.
Yeah.
The service is important because
Sure.
it encourages, it teaches, it gives the community the opportunity
Yeah.
to come together and declare truth to one
Mm-hmm.
another in songs and in prayers
Yeah.
and in those teachings. It's an important part, but the event is not to be experienced
Yeah.
for your own pleasure.
Yeah.
It's to be challenging, it's to be learning,
Mm-hmm.
it's to be there for one another.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are, but when
Yeah.
you elevate when you elevate the event coordinator, when
Yeah.
you elevate the event speaker or the person who's on the stage,
Mm-hmm.
when you elevate them, you take away from the responsibility of the
Yeah.
community.
I think the way that celebrity culture like kind of sneaks in and has had a massive negative effect in the lives of everyday Christians is that we've professionalized it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the pastors or the ministry organization leaders, the
Mhm.
parachurch organizations, they're the professionals.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can't I'm not the pastor. I can't do this. I can't
Yeah.
do that. But then you look at Paul's, challenge to the church. It's like, okay, so as ministers, what's our responsibility? It's to equip the saints for the work of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And that ministry term, it just means serving.
Yeah.
So how is it
Yeah.
that as a ministry leader, like, are we equipping people to serve,
Mm-hmm.
or are we putting all of our time into the event?
Yeah.
And so then what's that look like when we look at a celebrity and we go, okay, we can appreciate a ministry leader that has a platform,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to not elevate them beyond the capacity of them to, like, okay, they're faithful in that moment. They're doing what God has provided an opportunity for,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not, oh, they're the professional.
Yeah.
I'm not. Is it motivating me to live more like Jesus in the way I engage with
Yeah.
people?
Yeah.
Do I have the ability to see them? Do I have the ability to watch the character of their life?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's what Paul, like, hey, remember how I lived when we were among
I
you?
lived with you. We hung out together.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Remember
Yeah.
this, right? And
Yeah.
so now culturally, we exist in a slightly different type of world.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not as easy. We don't live in the same neighborhood
Yeah.
as everybody that goes to our church most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to find those opportunities. You've got to, I think in some ways it takes more effort
Mm-hmm.
to model faithfulness
Mm-hmm.
than it does to teach it.
Yeah. And the more elevated a leader becomes, or not even a leader, but just the more elevated a person becomes,
Yeah.
the more insulated they are from
Yeah.
the rest of the people.
Absolutely.
And so to desire to live life together,
Mm-hmm.
you can't do that when
Yeah.
you become the celebrity pastor.
Yeah.
When you become the preachers and sneakers guys
Yeah.
who are wearing $5,000 suits
Yeah.
or jeans or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and speaking to thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah.
You can't step off that platform
Yeah.
and then go hang out with people for
Sure.
lunch because you just can't do it. It's
Yeah.
impossible. You're insulated.
It is a challenge even in a small church
Yeah.
to
yeah.
not become isolated.
Yeah, we're a church of 100, and
Yeah.
I remember when we went from the church of 30 to a church of 80,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh man, I can't talk to everybody on a Sunday morning anymore. I
Yeah.
can't go around and say hi to everyone.
Yeah.
Like what are we going to do? What
Yeah.
I feel so separate, so insulated
Yeah.
now, and that's 80 people,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is, and some churches would laugh at that and say
Yeah.
that's our small group.
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. But I think there are I think there are lessons that we need to reevaluate as Christians. Who are the people? Like, what are the expectations we are placing on people that have a platform? And so, I think it's the people that I would say have influenced me most faithfully over my lifetime have often been the ones that I had the opportunity to see the way they lived.
Yeah.
There have been people that are thought leaders that I've appreciated, but the people that gave me the example of pastoral ministry that I find myself more and more drawn to were the ones who I saw the way that they did it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't event based. It wasn't Sunday based. It wasn't this or that. It was, they were present. And they were accessible. And, even if they weren't at my church, if I reached out to them, they made time. There was like, well, I can't do it today, but let's do it tomorrow, or let's do it the day after, or it was like you matter, and so let me make myself available.
And I've noticed for myself, the thought leaders perhaps that I've appreciated the most are people who, for the first 50 or 60 years of their life, were kind of obscure. Like I think of Brennan Manning, who had been writing books back in the late 60s and early 70s, and had this resurgence in the 90s when he was like 70 years old or something like that. All of a sudden, everybody was reading his book. And they were deeply influential to me. Dallas Willard, who had been writing in the 80s and 90s, but it was like early 2000, mid 2000s was when his he just kind of exploded onto this scene, and he was near retirement age at that point. C.S. Lewis even didn't really start getting a national following until he was well into his 40s and 50s. So there, Eugene Peterson's another one that I think of.
His was kind of like an unexpected thing. Somebody found something he did as a pastor for his congregation, was like, I like this.
This is a good, you did a good job here. He was a pastor of a small church for a vast majority of his life. So he didn't come into prominence until he was in his 50s or 60s, So I think that there's something to be said for that the people who we can still look at and see as good, solid Christian leaders, they were the ones that just did what they knew they should do for a really long time. And if they got popular, then they got popular. I'm just going back to the beginning. I don't want to be suspicious of people in their 30s who get a national audience. But we've seen and we've watched so many of these guys fall apart. And it wasn't necessarily because their character was that bad. It was because the system elevated them to such an extent that they either thought too much of themselves or they just had far too much pressure on them. And they couldn't handle it. And I think the best example of this is Joshua Harris, who back in the 90s wrote books when he was like 18 and 19 years old and went on speaking tours. Before he was 20 years old, he had a national audience. And he didn't seek that out. It was the system. It was a publishing system. It was a celebrity culture system that was just kind of getting started that said, hey, here's a guy who's well-spoken, who's charismatic, who can get an audience, and he's saying things that parents like. Parents want to hear this stuff. We're pushing that. We're elevating him, and he just broke down. Like he couldn't handle that amount of pressure. And I think that I don't necessarily blame the individuals. How they respond to it, certainly there's culpability there. They're responsible for their response. But if we as a Christian culture don't stop just running over people in order to elevate them, running over people when it all comes down, when all is said and done, it's to make money. It's to feed a culture that says, if I elevate this person, we will make more money. The church will make more money. The publishing company will make more money. The media company will make more money. Whoever it is, they're looking at somebody to make them money, so they elevate them.
Yeah.
And it hurts the person that's elevated, and it hurts the people that are elevating them and are following them. And I think that I don't know what the solution is, other than to do what you talked about and to go back to Jesus saying, stop it.
Yeah.
Stop elevating people. Start living your Christian life in the way that the disciples did, in the way that Paul did, in the way that Jesus did.
Yeah.
Start just being there for one another
Mm-hmm.
and helping your community.
Yeah.
And stop thinking that just because somebody has a platform or someone's given them a platform, that they are the epitome, that you no longer have to do to your neighbor. You now just pour all your energy and time into consuming them.
Yeah. It's I think it's the hard part is that we're people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's innate within us to latch on to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that something bigger than ourselves can be a tangible person. But that's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, let me know when you figure it all out.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good place to draw to a close. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back after our break.
Yeah.
It's good to be.
I'm broken.
It's good to be back in these conversations. Help us become celebrities by subscribing to the channel.
You're listening to the Korean pastors again, aren't you?
Yeah. If you want to subscribe, tell all your friends. We'll become celebrities and tell everybody how not to be.
Yeah.
How about
that? That you can take that job.
I'll do that.
I don't have a beard, so he's automatically going to have more authority than me.
I've Spurgeonized. If you would like to interact with us, you can do that through the comments section. Send us a message on YouTube. Go to info@discoverthegrove. Send an email there. Check out the church at discoverthegrove.com. Multiple ways for you to interact with us. And
or if you have suggested topics as well.
Suggested topics. If there's something that you want to talk about. If there's in our upcoming series, that's not in the Bible. If there's something that you wonder, is it in the Bible? I've always heard this. I'm not sure it's actually there. Feel free to ask the question, and we'll address that. But until next week, thanks again for being here. We're glad that you are, and we hope you have a great week.
Yep. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.